Chapter 1. Adam. Guitar case in hand, he shut the lich gate of the churchyard, relieved to close behind him his day. Still prickling in his mind was the certain knowledge that beyond the turmoil of the skies, the moon would tonight slide into the earth's umbra and glow blood red. The day's Gazette had given over a whole 2 pages to the event, including a colored photo of a previous blood moon, an insert portraying an astronomical explanation, and the musings of a stargazer columnist, Stella Verne. That an eclipse augurs the death of a king, the ancients observing the firmament in the deserts of Mesopotamia knew. After all, they bore witness to the happenstance, those soothsaying men of yore. They would not have reasoned otherwise. Without the benefit of modern science, the correspondence had taken root in the collective psyche, even finding its way into early Christian history. Millennia later, in those predisposed, the omens still held sway, helped along by Stella Verne and the Gazette. In the dawn of the day, Adam had been feeling, in the totality of his being, in balance, if precariously. Then he'd read Verne's piece, and the news lodged in the vestibule of his mind. At first a mere filament of dust on the doormat, but on his way to work, the filament soon multiplied into a cloud that threatened to suffocate his sanity. By the afternoon, he had to reassure himself that he knew no kings. He tried to shake his mind free, anxious not to find himself unhinged. On the journey home, he'd managed to reason away as sensationalism Verne's blood moon auguring in what must have been an otherwise uneventful 24 hours. And in a fleeting moment of cynicism, as he'd readied to leave his house for the evening sessions, he knew that no one in the region would witness the event, as the heavens would be obscured by the rapidly coalescing cloud. Noting the warmth of the evening air on his skin, he strode down the lane, passing the Stones' weatherboard cottage, circa 1900 and tastefully restored, with a bullnose veranda and elegant finials. A house that stood in large grounds adjoining the once hallowed land of his own abode. He scarcely knew the owner, Philip Stone, but he pictured the sister, Eva, curled up somewhere inside, perhaps reading a book, as she seemed wont to do. Or perhaps he'd find her with her brother, celebrating Christmas Eve at the cabin. It was a thought that generated some cheer. The day had been uncommonly hot and close. The time of year might otherwise have brought a light breeze to soothe the skin and a cool night for restful sleep, yet the solstice had seen a climate so at variance with the norm, it had instilled in the residents of Burton at best puzzlement or unease, at worst a babbling hysteria. Several times in the previous few days he'd stood at the counter of the general store and found himself privy to the grim ruminations of someone or other on the topic of the weather, as if the sunny native disposition had arrested at the foot of that cleft of a valley. On Christmas Eve, the scaremongering had been worse than ever, as the prospect of a storm of hitherto unknown intensity moiled over the plains to the south and to the west. Well, not yet 8 o'clock. The sun had long since fallen behind the mountains, leaving Burton in shadow to be darkened further by the cloud that amassed beyond the peak. Wafts of cool air stroked his cheeks and the bare skin of his neck. Wafts that soon became breeze, and as he reached the bottom of the lane, a fearful wind funneled its way up the valley. Turning the corner by the gnarly sycamore tree, he faced into the brunt of it, the wind buffeting his guitar case and pressing his trousers to his legs. He battled his way to the old beam bridge with its timber deck and iron railings. He crossed halfway and set his guitar case at his feet and leaned against the metal, feeling through his pants the hard cold against his hips. Below, the river flowed in deceptively languorous fashion, having long before carved a deep channel through the sandstone, moving apace, undeterred by the tangle of fleabane and horehound on its banks. Whence it began in the springs of the mountains to the east, the river gathered itself numerous tributaries, pressing through the confining cleavage of the mountains to emerge like a blessing on fecund plains, and wending on through the city to the coast. In the twilight the water appeared black to Adam, the rush of its movement unheard beneath the wind about his ears. He stood for some moments, pinned to the railings by the wind, uncertain whether to head back home and survive the storm on his own, or proceed along the bridge to the cabin, where he would find company of a sort. The regulars, locals, all of them. His indecision held him fast, for were he to return home, he would endure a night of relentless wailing as the wind found its way through every crevice, much of the old church, after years of renovations, still in disrepair. It was not a comforting prospect. Yet, were he to join the others in the cabin, he would be forced to endure wailing of another sort, the bemoaning cries of a demented crone, the sort of demented crone one would expect to find in a strange old town like Burton. Yet he was beholden, for he'd been at last invited to fill the guest spot at tonight's sessions, Christmas Eve no less, and whilst few would be in attendance on this foul night, he could not let down his mentor, the one and the great Benny Muir. He picked up his guitar case, lifting his gaze from the watery gloom. The town, scattered to either side of the river, was obscured from view by thickets of laurel and dogwood, dwellings kept hidden by their owners covetous of seclusion. Even the general store squatted low on its haunches behind a privet hedge. From the vantage of the hill, the cabin was barely visible. Only its low gabled roof emerged from the slope of the hill. A few paces on, and it would be gone. He left the bridge as if leaving behind a watershed. So intense was his certainty that whichever path he took would somehow assure his fate. His had not been a convivial day, riven as he was with anxiety that never left his soul. He had reached an age of slow recognition that the mess of thought and feeling that propelled him this way and that, affecting his every mood, was a fraying ball of wool. All he knew for certain was he might unravel at any moment, and it was an effort to keep himself wound tight. Yet his was angst he could make only partial sense of, the sort of inchoate angst manifesting in one who never belonged or was properly loved. He carried a gnawing sense of not being worthy, and as the world had rejected him, so he rejected himself. He never knew of his father, for his mother and grandmother never spoke his name after he absconded from his responsibilities prior to Adam's birth, although it was mentioned that he'd labored at the steelworks on the far side of the city. His mother, a singer who earned a meager living fronting skiffle bands and taking in washing, had been a bony, careworn woman, the one photograph in his possession rendering her more Billie Holiday than Sarah Vaughan in spirit. She took to mothering like a cuckoo, leaving him at his grandmother's house whenever she performed, and one time she never came back. He was only 2 at the time. Left with no choice, his grandmother, a widowed pensioner who spent all day, every day, knitting and spitting platitudes by way of wisdom, raised him to be a good and honest boy. He did his best to fulfill her expectations, making sure he was well-behaved, mild in manner, and ever eager to please. His grandmother lived in a plain old house in a suburb by the sea, a suburb filled shoulder to shoulder with plain old houses. While the other kids from the local school ran amok on the beach or in the park, chasing seagulls, skimming stones, and building sand castles, or playing mock battles with stick swords, he sat alone in his room and read Tom Sawyer and Heidi and Little Women, in fact wading through all the classics on his grandmother's bookcase indiscriminately. He remained a good and honest boy until his voice broke and his eyes fixed on his music teacher, Mr. Hodder. Angst grew alongside his fixation, and he yearned to fall into Mr. Hodder's arms, kiss him passionately, fumble for his satisfaction. But Mr. Hodder, he knew, was married, apparently happily, and there was never a glimmer of desire in those cool, recondite eyes. Adam had no choice but to repress his carnal urges and wait until he'd escaped his grandmother's knitted prison. After many lonely years of adulthood, Adam relinquished his virginity to the frontman of a Lee Reese cover band, the Reese Effect. It had been a balmy summer's night, and the city bar full of smartly turned-out, heavily scented men. The Reese Effect was crammed into a corner stage area, not much larger than a king-size mattress, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. The singer stood on the floor in front, facing the left speaker as he talked to the bass player on the stage. He was a crane of a man, reaching the height of the guitarists behind him, his formidable stature enhanced by his hair, slickly coiffed, glossy, and swept back from his face, hair that lent him a further 2 inches of height. As the singer turned and Adam saw the width of his shoulders, he quickly adjusted his spindly crane analogy. The singer had a long, strong-featured face of Latin pallor, with the eyes of a hunter on the prowl, and a pencil mustache that accented his full, spreading lips. The bass player struck up a pulsing groove, and the singer slid into it. Holding his mic stand, he sang, and those full lips parted, unveiling a complement of large white teeth. His appearance was altogether striking, if disquieting, the sort that turned stolen glances into long gazes. As if underscoring the countenance, he wore black patent leather shoes with white button-down spatterdashes, an incongruent match with the red satin body shirt he wore tucked into black drain pipes, his manhood making a tennis ball bulge in the crotch. When their eyes met, Adam couldn't help but be dazzled by the singer's swaggering charm. Instantly beguiled, Adam left the bar, wine glass in hand, and took up a seat near the stage. At the end of the night, when the crowd had thinned and the band played their last song, the lead singer attended exclusively to this new, adoring fan. Always on the road, wooing audiences at venues far and wide, Juan Diaz was a rare breed of singer-songwriter able to exist on the proceeds of his craft. With tattoos on his collarbone and a crucifix dangling from his left ear, he was ex-army fit, a man tough enough to front a drunken rabble. Yet his animal allure that could enchant the unwary from the first fogged Adam's vision, and he became Juan's partner and devotee. 4 turbulent years later, and Juan Diaz was a man Adam feared, a man too cruel, too vainglorious, too dangerous to countenance in his proximity. Ever since the demise of this one union of promise, angst returned to become a fixture of Adam's psyche, abrading his sensitivities like thistle. It was with a leaden heart and an ambivalent mind that Adam followed the road that followed the river to the cabin. He paused again, this time at the edge of the privet hedge outside the general store, a ramshackle hodgepodge of a building clad in rotting weatherboards and flitches, with closed-in verandas of asbestos sheeting painted a pale cream. The roof sloped every which way to accommodate a concatenation of small and narrow rooms. A dim light shone through a small window. The proprietors, Rebecca and David Fisher, would no doubt be partaking of an unhealthy dollop of festive fare, and with luck, their bellies rendered so full neither would muster the will to move beyond their threshold, though he doubted luck had the power to override habit. A habit never once broken by either party, one that found them every Wednesday night in attendance at Benny Muir's cabin sessions. To his left, the northern mountaintop was shrouded in cloud. The wind pushed him on, past a vacant block where once he'd tried and failed to stave off Juan's wrath after a night of heavy drinking, Juan in a frothing rage and Adam placating that he truly hadn't flirted with Philip Stone. Seconds later, one abandoning him in a bruised and bleeding heap.